Our food system is poisoned. The FDA is pushing poisons upon us. Corporations are pushing poisons upon us. And our bodies are going through a level and living on a day-to-day basis in a level of toxicity that it is not meant and never was meant to handle. The stuff that's in our water, the heavy metals in our foods, the mycotoxins in, our foods as well, and the air in these buildings that are filled with toxic mold, and most people just don't know it's there, and they're breathing it all day.
Well, we're excited for another episode of Patriot on Purpose today, and we've got a really special guest with us today. Been very fortunate to know this guy for going back to I think 2006 now is when. It's either 2006 or 2007 when Mike and I first met through another guy that I did business with back in the day. It's been a lot of fun getting to watch Mike build his businesses and just the different evolutions that's taken, and just getting to be friends and get to experience that together. But Mike's been an entrepreneur for 20 now by Mike Dillard. Mike Dillard's with us today. He's been an entrepreneur for over 20 years now. I think some of the earlier ventures were the Elevation Group, Magnetic Sponsoring, both very successful companies. Now he's focused on a business called Richer Every Day and Rewire, which are I think tied into Mike's passions, which are now helping other people find not just financial success and freedom, but also freedom from the things that can weigh us down on life emotionally, health-wise. So I think I would say Mike's really just helping people to be successful and healthy in all aspects. I've been an investor in Bitcoin, investor in Opus Sound, on it, and there's some other very successful businesses in there. And is also involved in organizations like Make-A-Wish, charitywater.org. I'm sure that there's probably more. And just again, the passions I would say are, business has obviously been one, financial success, freedom, and then now a more full spectrum approach to helping people just find health and success in every aspects. But yeah, man, Mike, very excited to have you. Appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nate. Good to see you again, brother. It's been a long time, as you mentioned. Adam, great to be here as well. So I'm excited to dive in today. And we've got, I think, a lot of great topics that we can cover that's going to help a lot of people out there today, because there's a lot of folks who need it in a lot of different categories. It's a fascinating time to be alive.
Amen.
Absolutely is. And before we dive into that, we like to ask everybody, because again, one of the things that I think we have become sensitive to, or when we were talking about this podcast, there's been this interesting thing that's taken place where, we live here in the United States. It's been an absolutely beautiful place where we've been fortunate enough to grow up and experience the freedoms and grow businesses and raise our families. It's all kind of based and founded on the principles that have enabled this to all happen. But it's become a dirty word, patriot. Like what does it mean to be a patriot?
I guess it depends on who you ask, right? If you live in DC, then yeah, it's a dirty word. To me, being a patriot is somebody who loves their country and who loves freedom. I picture, William Wallace and, Mel Gibson in the movie and stuff when I hear the word patriot, more than anything else. And for me, it's very simple and very clear. It's people who love freedom and who want to stand up for that.
Yeah, I don't think you can go wrong with that answer right there. Especially being a Texas boy, I'm sure that was going to be what was coming out of your mouth. You're just like, it's freedom.
Yeah, because you are Texas born and raised.
I am. I was born in San Antonio. I spent a brief stint, about a year and a half, in San Diego right after I graduated from Texas A&M, pursuing an entrepreneurial venture out there. I arrived in Temecula, California, with a car that the transmission broke, so I'm coming over the mountains into Cali in second gear, and that was on September 10th, 2001. So I wake up the next day in my little apartment, which has no internet or phone service yet, and from a phone call from my mom at 7 a.m, with the trade towers going down. And so all of my business dreams and aspirations at that moment, disappeared within 24 hours of arriving. And then I've spent some time in Dallas, and then have been here in Austin now, I want to say, for about 15 years.
And where did you spend? Did you grow up? The earliest years, were those in San Antonio?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, born in San Antonio and spent my life there through high school. So.
And when did the entrepreneurial part of Mike Dillard show up? Has that always been there, or was that something that developed later?
That was in high school. So my dad was a great baseball coach, and he coached me and our teams, all the way through the moment I could hold the bat through to high school. And because he was the coach of the team, even when I was playing, obviously I had to go there, but during the season I broke my thumb, tagged a guy out, bent my thumb back the wrong way. So I still had to come to all the practices that he'd come to. And luckily we practiced in a park that had a bunch of mountain bike trails on it. So I ended up getting a $300 or $400 Trek mountain bike, and my hand was in a cast, and I started just riding these trails while the other guys were doing practice one-handed. And ended up becoming, going pro in that sport, won 2 Texas State mountain biking championships the next 2 years. And in order to do that, I needed to make some money, initially to get started, buy a real bike, real equipment. And so I would train after school in the day. I'd get home from school, I'd ride 30 to 50 miles a day. And then I needed to get a job. So I got a job at the original Macaroni Grill in Boerne, Texas, before it became a chain. And I would do that on the weekends. And I would get home about 1 a.m. On a Friday or Saturday night. And I just need to decompress. So I would just sit in the living room, put on the television. And this has got to be in 1996 earlier than that. Around 1996. So there's no social media, right? There's no YouTube, there's no Google, there's none of that stuff. All we had was the television. And when you jump on TV on a weekend at 1 a.m, the only thing you're going to find is infomercials. And so I would find Tony Robbins and Carlton Sheets and, all of these guys. And I'd be sitting there after busting my ass if I had a double shift for 14, 15 hours. And I'd get inspired and I'd see, hey, there's something else you can do out there, and there's no cap to how much you can make, and there's nobody to tell you, when you have to work and how long. And when you're on your feet for 15 hours a day working nonstop at a restaurant like that, you get really inspired pretty quickly that, hey, I need to do something more, for myself. And so that's where the seed was planted. And I started buying those products and started going through them. And by the time I was in college, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, so I didn't even go to my classes. I would literally go in College Station to the Barnes & Nobles they had there, or maybe it was a Borders, and I would sit in the business section and I would just read books in the little cafe that they had on marketing. And then I would go to the cram classes and pay my $50 to get the old tests, 3 days before the test, and get caught up. And I'd take the test. I'd usually pass with a C. And I was an entrepreneur by the time I was, a junior in college. So.
Yeah. What was I don't know, we won't probably dive too far down this path because there's another one that we really want to go into with you, but what was the first entrepreneurial venture?
The very first one was writing basically a booklet, because I don't know if they even had ebooks back then, that had everything I wish I had known as a freshman coming into university. So which dorm to go in, how to build a loft, parts do you need, what do you need to bring, which professors do you want, which do you not want to get, everything that I wish I had known, right? And what I realized buying this course that I bought off an infomercial is that you could buy the registration contact information for the incoming freshmen. And so I wrote this little booklet, had it printed at Kinko's, and then I bought that list of the incoming freshmen, and I wrote a sales letter, and I printed those out by the hundreds, and I would mail them to all of the incoming freshmen, and they would literally mail me back a check to get their booklet, and that's how it would go. And I know I sold a few of them. I don't remember, the goal was maybe I can scale this out to all of the universities, right? But I think about that time, I also found network marketing. Back in those days before internet marketing existed, network marketing was really the only accessible opportunity for a broke college student, because you could start a business for $100 to $300. And it came with training, right? It came with an upline and support and a community and all of these great, fantastic things that industry offers. But I sucked at it, man. I was very much an introvert, and that is an extrovert's industry. So the thought of having to go talk to my friends or family members, make a list, put them on the phone with an upline member or send them a CD or a DVD, all of that stuff scared the shit out of me. And so I struggled in that industry for the next 6 years because I saw the potential. I didn't quit. I had sponsors that were making 50 grand a month. And I was like, man, if I got to a point at any stage in my life, even if I'm 40 and I'm making 50 grand a month, I've made it at that point. And so I didn't give up, but I don't think I made a dime for 5 or 6 years. And I won't go down this rabbit hole, but what solved that problem for me was finding direct response marketing, figuring out how to write sales copy. And I had a natural knack for that as an introvert. I studied and wrote out winning sales letters every day by hand for about a year. Got really good at writing copy, learned how to use Google AdWords, learned how to put a capture page up, and learned how to basically get people to come to me without having to call them. So attraction marketing, I was kind of one of the first, I guess, people to use that back then. And once I figured that out and cracked the code, I went from working at P.F. Chang's waiting tables in my early 20s to making my first $1 million within about 18 months. And so it was the same industry, same market. Instead of going up against the stream, swimming against it, doing things that were not aligned with how I'm built or how my psychology is made, in switching that and going with the current, everything just instantly changed overnight.
Handwriting of the sales letters, was that something that you came up with on your own, or was that under the direction of somebody else? Because I actually did that, but it was because I had a course. It was like, hey, you need to take these classic sales letters and rewrite them until you know them front to back.
Yeah, it may have been the same one. It was something I picked up a tip from somebody, and I don't remember who it was at that time, but that was the single biggest facilitator to my success. It wasn't buying all the courses and reading them. It was going in and writing them out by hand, because you basically learn how to speak like a salesperson, right? Through osmosis. Basically, it's like going into a different country. You just start to pick up the language. You start to speak with an accent all of a sudden before you know it, and you kind of feel self-conscious about it, but it just happens naturally. And that's what happens when you write these letters out by hand, is you pick up the grammar, the pacing, the transitions, the headlines, the vocabulary. And if you do that for 100 letters, you're just going to start writing the exact same way. And that's how I did it.
Yeah, I think that's an applicable behavior that you can put into almost any type of industry. Like it's the whole fake it until you make it idea, is if you live it as if it were true, if you're writing it out, you just absorb it and then it becomes who you are, not even through an active, it's active in the sense that you're writing, but it's a passive learning through the repetition of what's been done well before. And, we've talked about failure many times on this podcast before. And what you're doing is you're just taking something that didn't fail, and then you're absorbing it. So 100 times of like the 100 best, then all of a sudden, like, you don't even know what it is to fail, because all you've ever written are the best things that have ever gone out. So it's a really cool thing for anybody to pick up on if you want to go from point A to point Z at an accelerated rate. Yeah,
100%.
The last question before we kind of pivot to where we really want to go, for anybody that's listening that has the desire to find financial freedom or do something different than what they're doing now, like if you were to start over now, like what would be your process for going into those waters and navigating them now?
Yeah, it around that same inflection point, right? Being in network marketing for 6 years, I probably went through 12 different companies or opportunities during that time. I would go to the events. I'd see the people making the millions of dollars walk across stage and get the rewards. And yet I'm sitting there failing in all of them. And so after doing that a dozen times, I finally, I'm smart enough to figure out that I'm the common denominator here, that there are hundreds of people making money and succeeding in every single one of these businesses that I signed up for, and yet I was failing at all of them. And so I realized it's not about the opportunity, it's not about the product, it's not about the marketing. The thing that finally clicked for me as I watched these people is I was like, every single one of them has become a professional at what they do. They are world-class at running an event, at a hotel or somebody's house. They're world-class at running a sales conference call or a webinar. They're world-class at talking to prospects over the phone and closing those individuals over the phone. They are incredibly good at what they do, and so they're getting paid like a professional. They're one of the best in the world at that. And I realized that I was the best at absolutely nothing, and that I had spent my time chasing opportunities thinking that success was going to come from something outside of me. And this light bulb moment was like, nope, success is going to come from inside of me. The opportunities are irrelevant. And the thing that is different between me and them is that they've mastered a skill set and I have not. And so that's when I said, no more opportunities. I'm going to learn. If I have to make money, if I'm going to make money, I have to learn how to sell. I don't want to sell to people over the phone or in person. I can learn how to do that through the written word, because there's people who are making hundreds of millions of dollars with these infomercials that I watch every day, or the long form advertisements that were in magazines or newspapers at that time. And they're doing it. I can do it. So that's when I decided to master the skill set of copywriting. Usually you need to master two skill sets. You need to be good at a foundational set of knowledge or skill. Maybe you're a doctor, or you're good at lifting weights or working out, whatever it may be. Maybe you're a great artist or photographer. And the second skill you have to layer onto that is then marketing and advertising, so that you can get your skill set or your product or service out in front of a large number of people at scale. And so for me, it was the two skills were learning copywriting, so now I could sell. And then the second skill was traffic, paid advertising through the form of Google AdWords. So I literally, went and bought How to Build a Website, the book for dummies, Dummies Guide to Building a Website, where we were using Dreamweaver back in the day, and nobody who's under the age of 40 has even heard of that software, but basically learned how to HTML code my own web pages back then. And I just acquired these skill sets. And what that does is acquiring a skill set allows you to execute and get a result. And the result's either going to be positive or negative, but you're going to learn from either one of those circumstances. And it's going to allow you to make, some changes, pursue, test number 2, go out and get a different result. And you're going to eventually start to get some positive results. That's going to start to build confidence in you. And then that's when things just start to spiral, and you're on kind of the train to success at that point, because you've empowered yourself with the ability to take action, get a result, learn from that result, get another result. And that's the formula for success in any single endeavor in this world.
Got it. No, that's great. That's a great answer. Thank you for that. And a lot of people find that helpful. I know I did. All right. So the next thing that we really want to dive into, and the reason why we're really thankful that Mike's willing to come on and talk about this today is because over the last few years, it isn't just any one thing. Like I think it's a series of a lot of things that have been happening over the years. A lot of, I would say, indirect as well as direct consequences of things that are happening, like whether it's with food manufacturers, it's what's happening, in different products are being made, what's happening like in our environments. People are sick, like, in some ways people are healthier than they've ever been. And there's new, innovations that are helping people live their healthiest lives, longer. In some cases, even like, I don't want to say technically reversing age, but, borderline people actually being able to reverse their age. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have people who are experiencing brain fog like they've never experienced before, fatigue, body pain, joint pain, not able to sleep, not able to think, to function, to even be able to work. And this is something that you've experienced in a very real way. And I remember having this conversation with you a couple of years ago when I think you were just on the upswing of being able to go on the attack after you'd figure out what happened, but like you almost died. Thank you for being able to talk about that. And like, let's just start at the beginning and would love to just hear what happened to you and the way that you systematically, found your way, out of that very scary situation, especially for a guy who's so high functioning and has experienced so much success and is used to operating at a very high level to literally not being able to do anything at all.
Yeah, that was hard, brother. So I was living in the Bowie in downtown Austin, brand new high-rise building back in 2017. And beautiful building. It has a pool on the rooftop. So you're up 35 stories high and you've got a pool with like a 360 view, around downtown Austin and the lake. And, I lived there and worked from there. So I spent a lot of time there. And I don't remember the exact date, but at some point Austin got a week of just nonstop rain that literally flooded downtown. There'd be 2 or 3 feet of water on some of the streets in downtown. They closed the roads down and it kind of became a ghost town. Unfortunately, there was so much rain that it flooded the pool on the roof, and all of the excess water came down the elevator shafts and flooded the rest of the building. And so that went on for about 3 days. Elevators didn't work for about 3 days. So I lived on the 26th floor, which was really interesting. I had my son, back, I want to say, gosh, around that age, he was probably 7 or 8 years old. And luckily, he's pretty small for his age, like I was, but I would have to put him on my shoulders anytime I wanted to go down and leave the building or back up, which is, 54 flights of stairs, with him to go get groceries or food or whatever for 3 days. So that was interesting. But they brought in dryers to kind of dry up the wall and the elevator shafts over the next week. I didn't think anything of it, but over the next 6 months, I started to notice changes in my mental state. My ability to handle stress started to decline rapidly. I would start to get short-tempered. My sleep started getting worse and worse. I started to have to take melatonin and sleep supplements, which I'd never really had to do before. Started getting really inflamed and kind of put on a little bit of weight. And I was just sitting, taking a break from work one day, playing a video game on my iPad, and I just felt a little click back here in the back of my head. It's just like almost like somebody like tapped it, but inside. It wasn't painful, and it was just momentary. But I was like, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to feel something in your brain like that. That's weird. But I didn't notice anything else that caused me concern. So, went to bed that night, didn't sleep a single minute, had a flight the next morning to go to Aspen Food and Wine with some friends and went up to that. Didn't sleep a single minute during that, the next 3 days there. Came home, didn't sleep a single minute again, to the point where I went 7 days and nights without a single minute of sleep. And at that point, I was starting to get really freaked out because I could feel my body shutting down and I felt like I was dying. Basically I was on the couch, non-functional. And anytime I would start to go unconscious, it's like my brain would just hit a wall and it would kind of bounce off of that, I don't know how to describe it, but this mental wall, and my heart would start racing, my breathing would get increase, and I'd be up again. And so then I'd try to fall asleep again. I'd get to that moment of going unconscious, and then boom, and my body would light up with adrenaline. And that went on for almost 2 weeks, and almost died from the lack of sleep, started getting suicidal. I called up a physician because I didn't really have a relationship with, doctors in a big way. I'm not a big pharmaceutical person, and I took care of my health for the most part. So that's not something I had a lot of experience with. And so he put me on Xanax and Ambien, and I was desperate. I was like, yeah, I'll try it. And that got me a double dose of Xanax, and a double dose of Ambien got me about 60 minutes of disassociated sleep. So I probably took that at like 9 or 10 o'clock, and I was back up again by 11:30. And that's when things got really scary. Because you start to get on Google and YouTube at that point, and you start to look up videos on insomnia, and you're looking for people who are having this similar type of serious experience. And I didn't find a single person who was talking about something this significant where they physically couldn't fall asleep for 1 to 2 weeks at a time. And then that freaked me out even more, because now I didn't have a direction on what had caused this or how to fix it. And that gets really, really scary. So that continued for, I want to say, 4 or 5 months, and my mental state just deteriorated dramatically. I started to get Parkinson's symptoms, so I tried to write, in a journal at night, and I just literally couldn't write anymore. My hand would just shake so bad. I would try anything I could to relax my body and my nervous system before going to bed at night, in some kind of desperate attempt to fall asleep. So I got a Muse headset, and I started to do meditation every night for an hour. And it was really just trying to keep control of my mental state and not go insane. When I would walk around downtown in Austin, I would just out of the blue get this paranoia that the buildings around me were just going to fall and collapse, right? So just kind of delusional type paranoia. And that became my world for a year. I didn't know what was wrong, so I just, business fell away, relationships fell away. I couldn't eat the foods I used to eat. I couldn't, have alcohol or anything. I couldn't socialize in any way. Couldn't race cars anymore. Couldn't use the gym anymore. I literally spent 23 out of 24 hours on my couch or in bed. Um, about a year in, I went and had uh, lunch with our mutual friend JP, and just broke down in tears with him, just telling him kind of what I'm going through. And he said, "Hey, have you ever been checked for toxic mold?" And I was like, "No, haven't even really heard of that." And he's like, "Go talk to Dr. Shippey, get a mycotoxin test, and that might be what you're dealing with," because he had gone through something similar, 3 years prior. So I did that, got a mycotoxin test done, which is a really easy test to check for toxic mold in the body. It's just a urine test. And the test goes from 0 to 50. Anything above 5 is in the red, and you need to go start taking binders to get that out of your body. And it stopped at 50, and my result came back and it was 21,000. So the lab called my doctor and they're like, "Hey, is this a mistake? We've never had a result this high before." And they're like, "No, it's an accurate sample." And so basically I had mold eating away the myelin in my brain, mold decaying a piece of fruit. And it was all over the body and causing all kinds of havoc. And so the insomnia was my nervous system and brain knowing that it was under attack and basically being eaten alive and being like, "Wake up, we're in an emergency, we need to do something." But unfortunately, I didn't know what it was freaked out about. And so I just stayed in that environment, right, for an entire year. As soon as I found out the results, obviously I moved out, and that was in summer. The click was in summer of 2018. I moved out a year later, so summer of 2019.
And that entire year, was it the same thing where you were taking Ambien and things like that? Like how were you? I mean, how did you make it that year?
The Ambien made me suicidal. And so if you're taking Ambien and you have that happening to you, it's very possible that that's the cause. Because I would get off of it and it would go away. The suicidal stuff would go away, and I'd get back on and it would come back. And I'm like, okay, I see what the cause of this. So I'm off the Ambien. And then, I credit Hal Elrod with basically saving my life. Because at that same time, a very good friend of mine is going through cancer and chemo. And he's like, "Hey, why don't you try THC? Try an edible. This is really helping with my sleep." And so I did. And that allowed me to get about 3 hours of sleep that night. And so the THC was a dissociative that took the alarm system offline enough to allow me to go unconscious and get a little bit of sleep. And that's what saved my life. So I started taking edible THC every day, and I'd get my 3 hours or so, and that kept me alive. After moving out of the environment and then getting on a protocol, so to get rid of mold, you've got to get out of the exposure, rule number 1. And then you've got to start taking all kinds of supplements and binders to detox it from the body and bind it and then remove it. And that can take years depending upon the exposure level, assuming that you've gone into a clean environment, you're no longer getting exposure. That's easier said than done if you live anywhere in a non-desert or mountainous climate. So if you're anywhere in a coastal or southern region in the United States, you're going to run into mold if a home is more than a couple of years old or if it's had any kind of leaks in it. And so I met my wife, Michelle, in September of 2019. And, at that point I was a little bit functional, but had a little bit of my mental capacity back, but still very weak, could barely walk, barely talk, barely think, and definitely still in survival mode. But we meet, and then 2020 happens in January. We move into a friend's house that we wanted to rent together, and unfortunately that house ended up having leaking pipes and mold in it. So I deteriorated rapidly over the next couple of months. And we spent, once we figured that out in 2020, we moved 6 times during the pandemic as a new couple, homeschooling our kids together and, dogs and all of this stuff. So it was kind of a baptism by fire. But yeah, that's one of the hardest parts in dealing with mold is finding a place that is clean. And eventually the solution for us is we just realized we have to go buy a new construction home and then put in some things that will help it stay sterile. Like you can put in air filtration and central AC dehumidification systems, industrial stuff that's up in the attic, and then ionizers that will help keep the ducts sterile and prevent spores from growing in there. And so that's when we moved into that home, I really started to recover. But it was, unfortunately, at that point, the damage to my nervous system after dealing with this for 3 years was about 3 years was extensive. So it was as if I was going through war and being shell-shocked from a PTSD perspective 24/7 for 3 years at that point, and had just destroyed the nervous system. And when you go through something like that, and people who've gone through COVID, this is happening to them as well. People who are dealing with long COVID, this is all the same stuff. People who are dealing with chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, what they've discovered over the last few years is that those are all symptoms of the exact same thing, which is an overactive amygdala. So when your body goes through a prolonged period of severe stress or trauma, the amygdala basically gets turned on, the on switch gets turned on full time, and the body thinks it's an emergency all the time, 24/7, and it's just pumping out adrenaline. It's pumping out signals of danger to different parts of the body that manifest in all of these various different symptoms. It could be a dozen different symptoms. For me, it was insane insomnia, chronic fatigue, and then eventually adrenal fatigue from the constant adrenal rushes. So other people, again, it could be just mysterious pain, fibromyalgia, brain fog, all of these other autoimmune issues.
The sleeping problems. Because I remember when I was dealing with my long COVID, the way you described like that where you're on the edge of sleep and then all of a sudden like you just get pulled out of it, like in your heart's racing and you feel the adrenaline and like that fight or flight. Like I absolutely was dealing with that when I had long COVID.
Yeah, that sucks, scary, man. And I've only heard of 2 or 3 people until you're probably the third. I've only met 2 other people who've also had that symptom. And the solution to all of this is all the same, which it ultimately comes down to, and this is after 5 years of me doing everything under the sun to heal and recover from this. I've done neurobiofeedback sessions, dozens of those. I've done transcranial magnetic sessions. I've done EMDR. I've done all kinds of psychedelics. I've done 9 ketamine IVs. I've done a dozen different MDMA therapy sessions. I've done Wachuma. I've done psilocybin. Like, healing from this and trying to figure out how to get out of the situation was my full-time job. So I like to think I went through an entire lifetime of therapy in about 18 months. One of the most beneficial of all of those was MDMA therapy. So what MDMA therapy does is it creates safety in the body. It floods your body with serotonin and the brain with serotonin, and you feel super safe and just enwrapped in love, if you will, over the course of 4 to 5 hours. And every time I did an MDMA therapy session, I noticed a dramatic and permanent shift in my symptoms. So I used to get adrenaline rushes down my legs like every 10, 15 seconds all throughout the days. After my first or second MDMA session, that went away and stopped. The Parkinson's stuff started to go away. Just the paranoia started to go away. And so that was really helpful, but it didn't get me across the finish line. I did 5-MeO DMT sessions as well. And when it comes to psychedelics, you have to be careful, because if you're in this particular state dealing with an overactive limbic system or fear center, there are certain psychedelics like MDMA that are very beneficial, and there are others that will F you up big time, and DMT is one of those, whether that's through ayahuasca or 5-MeO DMT through a pen. You do not want to do certain medicines when your brain is in a paranoid state, because it'll just cause more trauma. So yeah, I mean, I could go in 10 different directions, from here. So yeah, where would you like me to focus?
So I guess for some of the people that I want people to be able to listen to this and identify, or associate some of the things that they might be dealing with. What What were just the full spectrum of symptoms? So, because I know, because you were on a very extreme, side of that spectrum, like just for someone that might be dealing with, mild to like leaning towards like severe mold, like what else could they be experiencing?
Brain fog is pretty universal across the board. Losing your brain function, losing your clarity of speech. Like for me in the past, I would not be able to speak with this kind of cognizance or clarity. I'd have severe memory issues. I remember one time when I was living in the Bowie still, I'd leave my apartment and I'd walk down the hall to the elevator, and I'd get to the elevator and I realized I left my car keys. So I'd walk back down the hall, open my door. I'd get in the door and I'd be like, why did I come back here? And I close the door, walk down the other, oh shit, I need my car keys. And I come back and I get like, why? Like that level of memory issues. So the memory issues, the paranoia, I, would start to think that my dearest friends were mad at me, or I had done something to upset people, or just all kinds of things that really were, very difficult to work through from a social perspective. Losing your temper, very easily, and just having a lot of irrational emotions all of the time. And then obviously, again, for me, the fatigue and the insomnia were the biggest for me. One of the hardest parts about all of this was losing my identity. And so, when you're in this for a couple of weeks, you're like, well, I'll figure this out and I'll be better in a couple months. And then a couple of months go by and you're like, okay, I'm going to kind of keep hope going and maybe I'll be better in another month or two. And then 6 months goes by and now your life that you once knew is basically gone. So again, not being able to eat the foods that you're in a state of extreme duress and pain and suffering. You want the things that give you comfort. Maybe it's a thing of ice cream or, some chips and queso or a margarita or whatever it may be, a glass of wine. And all of that stuff, went away. Being able to hang out with my friends went away. Being able to race cars, gone. Being able to work and use my brain and make money all disappeared. And I literally just became non-functional, living on the couch all day. And that was really difficult to go throughout your entire life, being able to enjoy all of the things you enjoyed, and then in one single moment overnight, losing all of that. Potentially forever at that point, because I didn't know what was going on, was incredibly depressing. And, probably close to the year mark, I was like, okay, I have to come to grips with the fact that I haven't been able to make money. I'm not going to be able to afford to pay my bills indefinitely. And right now I'm, 40 something years old and I've got a child and I'm looking at potentially having to move in with my parents and living with them for maybe the rest of my life. And that's not a fun place to be. But I've seen a lot of stories from other people who are in that place and going through that right now. And so I want to just let people know that I understand exactly what it is that you're going through. I know the fear, I know the pain, I know the doubt and the darkness that you're in. And I also want you to know that there's definitely a path out to whatever it is that you're going through. The human body is absolutely resilient. And if you got into this condition, there was a reason that happened. And if you don't give up and you continue forward, you will discover that reason, and then you will be able to reverse your way out of that. For me, it's taken over 5 years to get to that point, and I'm still going through the final stages of this process. For me, I'm still, mentally I'm back at about 80% of my capacity, but physically I haven't worked out in a year. Walking a mile is a big deal for me at this point. But every year I'm making progress, right? I'm better this year than I was before, and better the year before that, and better the year before that. And even in the darkest depths of the first year one, when I didn't know what this was, I would do my meditation and I would sit there and I would just tell myself over and over again, I'm going to get out of this. I'm not accepting this. And I had 100% certainty that at some point I would heal and get my life back. I never gave in and accepted where I was as a permanent circumstance. I might have thought about, hey, I'm going to have to adjust and move in with my folks, but I never gave up hope. even when I didn't know what it was that I was dealing with. And I think that's incredibly critical to understand that this can be happening to you, or excuse me, for you instead of to you, right? We've all heard that phrase. And at the end of the day, this has turned out to be one of the single best things that's ever happened to me. It's by far and away the hardest thing that I've ever gone through, and I would not wish it upon my worst enemy. But in many ways, it saved my life. It got me, it sent me on a completely different trajectory. Going through all of those different therapies forced me to heal. One, it made me aware of all of the baggage that I had been carrying my entire life, from being bullied and picked on when I was young to being defrauded, as an entrepreneur, and all of these other moments going through a divorce that I had been carrying, but I never really felt or processed. And it was just carrying that emotion and baggage in the body still. And I would just cover that up with alcohol at night, or racing cars, or adrenaline, or shooting guns, or, whatever it may be. An A-type entrepreneur, typically does in their 30s or 40s. And so being forced to face that and then process that was life-changing. Being able to forgive the people that I needed to forgive, let go of the anger, the hate that I was carrying, let go of alcohol. I haven't had a sip of alcohol for 5 years. I was not an alcoholic, but I enjoyed it. As an introvert, it allowed me to be social, and it's how I would wind down at night. And then in the day, I would fill myself up on caffeine, right? I would have a ridiculous amount of caffeine every morning. And that was kind of my routine. And that's unsustainable. As an entrepreneur, we're super, super pig-headed, and we can just keep pushing ourselves through a tremendous amount of pain. But those types of habits are literally poison, and they decay the body. And when you reach a certain point, it's going to break the body. And that's what it did for me. That was certainly a contributing part of the problem. But going through that crisis is what, again, allowed me to go through the work to not need that stuff anymore. So I haven't had caffeine or alcohol in 5 years. My diet's completely changed. I don't eat gluten anymore. Everything I eat is organic, grass-fed. I have an emotional IQ now that I've never had before. I have the ability to have an open, loving relationship with my wife and our kids and my friends that I've never had before. In the past, there were always emotional walls up, after getting hurt, in my youth. And those prevented me from living a full enjoyable life. And if it wasn't for this, I don't know if I ever would have been able to heal that stuff and experience the amount of growth and, health that I've taken from that. And so it has been one of the best things that's ever happened to me.
Yeah, one of the things that really has struck me is that at the beginning of your story, you talked about how you struggled in the network marketing, found something that really worked out for you, made your first $1 million in 18 months, had this really successful career, and all of a sudden, this is one of these truisms that everybody knows, but your health becomes an issue and nothing else seems to matter. Like, you could have been a billionaire, and once your health is taken from you, once your ability to facilitate and maintain relationships is taken from you, once you're no longer able to control your body, your mind, or everything, then, the money, the success, everything that you've ever built doesn't matter until you can restore your health. And, your story is interesting because something happened to you, external to you. But a lot of people end up finding themselves in situations where their health begins to fail because of things that they have done, like you were talking about with caffeine or alcohol. These things that we use because they make us feel good, because we are willing to weigh the risk against the eventual outcome without realizing that actually 10 years down the road, your alcohol use, whether it is in moderation or not, or your caffeine use because you're now dumping a lot of adrenaline into your body, your cortisol levels are spiking at the end of the day, is all going to have kind of it could ultimately have a cataclysmic effect. And, this is something that I've even noticed, like, I'm not an alcoholic, but I drink more than I should. If I've listened to Andrew Huberman's podcast, I should only be having 1 to 2 drinks in a week. And if I have 7, that's way too many. And, you want to start dialing those things back, because the last thing you want to do, especially as an entrepreneur, is set yourself up for failure, especially a health failure in the future. And, I think it's really interesting that, again, it happened to you. You had to live through it. And so many other people have these health outcomes that they manufacture on their own. And I'm just hoping that a lot of people realize that 1 or 2 options or 1 or 2 possibilities are out there when it comes to health. Something happens to you external. So maybe it's cancer, maybe it's a car accident or whatever. You can't control that. but you can definitely control what you do to your body and how you take care of it so that you don't have to go through something that difficult. Like, having type 2 diabetes or whatever preventable disease is not something that you have to develop. You can stop it right now. Yeah, so it's just one of those things I'm struck by. One, you made it through it and you're making it through it right now, but I'm hoping people realize that success doesn't matter if you don't have your health. So if you are on this path towards achieving success and you have or maintaining behaviors that could lead to negative health outcomes, like, it's really a good idea to keep this in mind. Like, this is a warning sign for anybody that's like doing things that could hurt them, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's this. I'll just share this real quick for folks along those lines. Feather brick semi. So I wish somebody had told me this earlier. Your body will communicate to you, and this is something that I learned. Your body is its own entity. You have your mind, your soul, and your body. And for me and for most entrepreneurs, your body is just a tool by which your mind makes its will manifest, right? It's a robot that we give commands to and it goes and does it. And that is not the case. Your body is its own entity and it stores emotion, trauma, feelings, all of these things. And so that was a big light bulb for me. But it communicates to us in a very subtle way that most of us will ignore or suppress, and that's feather brick semi. So when your body needs help and it doesn't like how you're treating it, it'll first start to send you a message in the form of a feather. Hey, you're a little bit, your hangover's lasting a little bit longer than it used to 10 years ago, right? In the past, you could bounce up after a night on the town and go to the gym the next day. Now it's taking you a full day to recover. So that'd be in the feather category. The brick category is you start to have physical ailments, or a physical experience of some kind. Your body's inflamed, you're overweight, your cholesterol numbers are way above normal, you're pre-diabetic. It's saying, hey, these are serious consequences coming down the road if you don't pay attention to what I'm trying to tell you now and change the habits that you have. And if you don't listen to the brick, which is getting hit over the head with a brick, you get run over by a semi. And that's when something catastrophic happens. And sometimes, a lot of the times, people don't live after they get run over by a semi-truck. That's when you have a heart attack. That's when you have, a brain aneurysm or, whatever it may be, or like I did, a brain injury like I did. And you don't want to get to that standpoint. And so if you start and just maybe meditate a little bit, and start to think, how is my body communicating me? Are there any kind of feathers that it's trying to tell me? Has it hit me over the head with a brick, a couple of times that I really need to pay attention to? The unfortunate part of modern day life is that we get into our habits and we have an endless number of distractions to numb us from that pain, is that it's really easy to ignore those signs and put them off. But eventually they do catch up with you, and you have to listen to them when they do. And the question that I would ask you if you go into meditation is, what are these habits trying to suppress? What is this caffeine trying to do for me? What is this alcohol trying to do for me? Because behind that is usually a subconscious program or suppressed emotions of some kind that it's using those to cover those up and suppress them so that you don't have to feel them. And that's what it was for me. Once I processed all of that stuff that had been suppressed in my life, I didn't need those things anymore. And not only do I not need them, even though I loved alcohol and caffeine, I don't want them because I know the cost that it has on the body now. But if you had told me that I'd be telling you that today, now, or at any point in my future, I would have said you were absolutely nuts, because those were two daily parts of my life that I really enjoyed, and that I would have not have given up willingly without that moment of pain coming in and forcing me to give up. And that's really what my circumstance was forced change instead of voluntary change. Forced change is really, really effective, but there's not 100% change going to come through it. Voluntary change, less effective, requires your own discipline and motivation to initiate, but a hell of a lot easier to go through.
And to your point with the brick, so one other thing, Nate, or what you had said about resiliency, this is right before I had jumped in. The brick is that moment where, you can get hit over the head with a brick and you can fix it. Like, just because you've done the damage doesn't mean that you can't reverse the damage. The semi, You're lucky if you survive it. And again, you may be able to reverse it. So again, for anybody who's listening and they're like, man, I'm too far gone. I'm this old. I've done this much. My body is just shot. No, it's not.
What that makes me think about, or go back to what Mike said, was when he said this was the best thing that ever happened to him. At the age in your 40s, if you get hit by a semi, your chances of recovering versus getting hit by a semi in your 60s is a lot different. So I think when you were saying this is the best thing that could have ever happened to you, is that, it's possible that this was an inevitable event for you. Like just the mold like accelerated.
I would have been dead, Nate, by now if this had not happened to me. The way that my body was going now at 46, 6 years later, I guarantee you I would have died from a heart attack on the racetrack by now, for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing. We don't, and I've never heard that the feather brick semi. It's funny when I was, like in my, so like one of the things that like I had a really hard time with over the years, and I didn't know actually why I needed it, but like in my mid 20s, all of a sudden I started having a really hard time paying attention, and that was when they prescribed me Adderall, and then that turned into Vyvanse, and I actually ended up being on that for like 20 years. But it all actually happened after I had a massive car accident when I was 20, and at the time, I didn't know this at the time, but I damaged my pineal gland, and so as I was on that prescribed medication to help me with like focus, which it started when I was at the University of Texas, and what I found out in my 40s was that like that whole feather brick experience, that like the Adderall and the Vyvanse was masking all of the symptoms that my body would have been actually giving me. So again, kind of going back to like being very mindful of what we put into our bodies and why we're doing it. And does it prevent us from being able to get those warning signals? Like caffeine's an example. It's not, in some ways, I think it actually is as detrimental as Vyvanse and Adderall. Vyvanse and Adderall are obviously a very extreme, level of stimulant to help with focus and attention issues, but it's like way overprescribed now.
Here's the interesting thing, right? You mentioned this at the very opening of the show. It is very, very, very clear to me and a lot of people since 2020. 2020 made it crystal clear, but it goes back decades before that. We as humans, but specifically Americans, are absolutely under attack. Our bodies are under attack. We are in a war right now that is not publicly declared unless you've gone through it, but our food system is poisoned. The FDA is pushing poisons upon us. Corporations are pushing poisons upon us, and our bodies are going through a level and living on a day-to-day basis in a level of toxicity that it is not meant and never was meant to handle. The stuff that's in our water, the heavy metals in our foods, the mycotoxins in, our foods as well, and the air in these buildings that are filled with toxic mold, and most people just don't know it's there, and they're breathing it in all day. Like the fact that our human system is still able to cope with it the way that as well as it has been is phenomenal. But I think the vaccine in 2020 broke it if you took that. It just pushed the system past its limit, and now we're seeing just all kinds of horrific consequences from that. And the only way that I think you can make it through and actually have a healthy life these days is you have to be aware of what's happening and you have to be proactive about it. Meaning, if you're just living your normal life that middle-class Americans do, and you're going to your neighborhood grocery store, like for us, H-E-B, and you're buying the shit off of the shelves there, and you're feeding your family that stuff, and you're drinking tap water, and you're going to the doctor and taking pharmaceuticals and antibiotics, you're done. Like, your quality of life is going to be over within years. You're going to die by 70. At this point, we're one of the only nations in the country with a decreasing average lifespan right now, and it's coming down like significantly. And all of this is the food and the water and the air that we're breathing in. I won't buy products at a normal grocery store. Like, I'll drive an hour to go to Whole Foods, or I'll mail order, specific things that are organic, grass-fed, and have the ingredients that I'm looking for. We're on double water filtration. We've got our own water well, so we get water out of the ground, then goes through 2 forms of filtration. We have our ionizers to keep stuff out of the air. But literally, you have to treat this as if you're in a survival situation just to keep yourself in a decent quality of life. Michelle's in Costa Rica right now checking some places out because as soon as the kids are, 18, we're probably going to be out of here just for health reasons and move to somewhere like Costa Rica where the food's not poisoned. We're not eating GMO products and our tap water's not filled with pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, I mean, it's by design.
100%.
That's kind of the thing that you're pointing out here.
1938, Napoleon Hill predicted this.
Yeah, what was that? The devil, outwitting the devil, yeah. And that's what's so sad about this.
You have to take down America from within, right? If you're China or Russia and you want to take down America, you have to lower the testosterone of the fighting age males and destroy the family and the household. So you have, increased racism, increased financial hardship, increased hardship in every category, and then get everybody fighting against each other while you're feeding them poison. I saw a report where, we get the majority of our pork from China. A lot of it from here, but they're feeding the pigs here literal toxins and like leftover industrial waste because the pigs will eat anything, like literally leftover pieces of plastic that are then going into the pigs, right? And then that's what you're finding at your normal grocery store shelf, that people can't afford to eat organic stuff. And those are endocrine disruptors, right? Those endocrine disruptors come in through the foods that you're eating, the deodorant that you're using, the toothpaste that you're using, the water that you're drinking. That's fucking up everybody's hormones. That's why you're seeing all of the youth these days so effeminate.
And you're just saying all the things that are going to get you canceled, man.
Well, I was like, you guys can beep out what you need to beep out. So
I really do want to talk about this. Just as, like, when we talk about the enemy and why we even started the podcast on purpose, or Patriot on Purpose, is because we want people to be aware that, yes, this is the specter of evil that we're facing. But the truth about it is, like, if we all galvanize, especially the people who are, I'm not even going to use the word becoming awake. It's just waking up to the fact that, yes, there is a narrative. Yes, you are being... If you're not open to the idea that somebody is working against you and working against your freedom so that they can enrich themselves, then you're just going to be part of the plan. And we can galvanize. We can affect change. We can make it so that organic food, organic whatever you want to take, clean products are the only thing available. And the industrial, agricultural centers are no longer a thing. It just takes action. The same thing when I was talking about health outcomes. Like, all you have to do is stop doing the things that are going to hurt you now, and you won't have to worry about developing whatever preventable disease. And if we just make these small changes in our daily lives, I'm going to make one choice towards eating better food. And maybe the other things that I can't control right now because it's financially unfeasible or it's just not available, I'll worry about that later. Just systematically working to chip away at the things that you need to change so that we can affect change down the road is all it takes. And we've seen this with the new app Public Square. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but yeah, so they went from like 10,000 users to 1.7 million users in the span of 18 months because people are tired of this agenda and they're trying to fight against it. And this is where I'm really encouraged with people coming on here like yourself who are exposing not only what you went through, and I'm not saying that was an engineered scenario, but it happened to be that you're living in an urban center where you've got 26 stories of people all exposed to the same thing. So without it being intentional, it did happen. Like, you should be on a farmstead with 50 acres in open air, and then that's the appropriate way to live. You should be loading up your back with heavy weights as you move things around your land or whatever, just so that you can live the way that we know is healthy. So, I've just got a lot of ideas swirling, but the most important thing is, like, to me, a patriot is somebody who is at least open to hearing the truth about what's going on and saying, I'm going to do something because I love freedom and I love my country and I don't want us to go any further down this path than we already are, and I can help control the outcome, even if it's the smallest thing that I'm going to start doing today.
The one thing I want to jump in there and say real quick, Mike, is that for anyone that's out there that's listening to this, that like, conspiracy theories, these are guys just, they're just going to talk about conspiracy theories and like be dismissive. Like, let's not, like, these things don't have to be collapsed. Like, those things could be true, but let's just say that those things aren't true. the facts are that the indirect or direct, it could be direct, but or for sure the indirect consequences of greed and some of the things that have driven people to make these decisions that they've made that have led to, the way that, our pots and pans are made, the way that industrial materials being put into pig pens for pigs to eat. Like, people can make those decisions, and these things can be happening regardless of whether, it's a conspiracy that's happening in the background or not. Like, these things don't have to, they can be completely separate.
I've asked myself over the last couple of years, is there a silver lining for everything that's happening in the world today, and specifically our country, right? And I think there is, in the fact that change requires severe circumstances. Like, significant change requires usually a lot of pain. For me to give up caffeine and alcohol and change my diet, all of that stuff required severe pain for me in order to do that, right? Because if not, I'm not going to have the discipline or motivation to have made those. And so that's really what we're going through as a country right now. We're going through an extraordinary amount of pain, which can actually be one of the single best things we've ever gone through, because it's going to force the people in this country to change. If we were not going through this, if we're not going through the vaccines and everything, the abuses that we're going through right now, everybody would just be going through their lives like kind of numb and on autopilot, right? And this circumstance, as horrible as it is forcing everybody to wake up. It's forcing everybody to see what's happening, and it's forcing them to all make changes. And if we want to become a better country, better families, guys, we weren't having these conversations 5 years ago. We weren't talking about living off the land or homeschooling or the Constitution or our rights or any of that stuff. And now a lot of people are talking about it. And I think that's a good thing. Right. But it is that pain that is the catalyst that lights the fuse in order for that to take place.
I don't think I could have said it better myself.
Now, the interesting part will be the spiritual piece that's coming next, the spiritual awakening that is being created now as well. And I think that's going to be kind of the last piece to come out from behind the curtain here. But that is, in my opinion, a very big and growing part about, all of this. And I think these events are also causing a spiritual awakening in a really big way. I think people are rediscovering God and Christ and Christianity, and frankly, any type of spirituality or faith that leads them to God. That was not a part of public discourse 5 years ago either. And now it is, because of the pain people are going through, watching their loved ones die, going through cancer, going through all kinds of other horrible ailments. It's forcing them to seek comfort and forgiveness, from God, and to wake up that aspect of their lives that had been dormant. And I think that's going to continue to increase here in the years ahead.
How did faith play into the journey that you've had in your experience?
It's been this is going to be an interesting rabbit hole to go down. In the last 2 years, it has come up in a very significant way. So I grew up in a very Christian household, went to church, did Young Life and all of that stuff. And then, after college, that was not really a part of my life at all. Like, I believed in God and I believed in intelligent design, but I was very analytical, left-brained, logical-minded. I believe in what I can see type thing until about 2 years ago. And well, a little longer than that. Let's say 3 or 4 years ago. And a lot of that was through the experiences that I had in psychedelic sessions. For me, those are tools that allow you to access a part of our existence that's not visible. So let's just call it makes the veil thin. That allows you to tap into God or, spirit, if you will. And in my experience, that's absolutely 100% the case. I've had experiences that are as real as the conversation we are happening now, that took place in a spiritual realm that really woke me up to that side of life again. Things got really interesting about 2 years ago. And I want to say this is a result of the severity of the toxic mold that I had, because what toxic mold can do is it can cause you to have extremely sensitive nervous system. to the point where some people can feel EMFs, right? And they have to go live in an isolated place with no EMF exposure. There's different things like that, but I think it was a combination of the mold for me causing an oversensitive nervous system combined with some experiences that I had with DMT. DMT is known as the spirit molecule. It's the strongest psychedelic you can take. And basically, when you take 5-MeO DMT specifically, you go through the dying process. You literally go through that process. And so it can be quite challenging. You want to do that with some very experienced facilitators. But you can go to the other side. And for me, I was able to do that. I went through the dying process. I had to say goodbye during that experience to myself, my life, my family, my son, everybody that I ever loved. And I had to surrender to God. And the moment that I did that, I went through the whole white light thing, and I felt embraced by God in a way that I cannot describe. It's a level of love and peace that I have never felt since and probably never will. It's the kind you hear when people come back from a near-death experience and they're like, it's 1,000 times more intense than anything you've ever felt before. It was that. And after that, everything for me changed. A few hours later, I could feel the chakras in my body. And for me, that was a bullshit term that was for hippies that I never gave any credence to or paid attention to in the past. And now all of a sudden I'm physically feeling them and I'm going, tick, 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 up and down. I'm like, oh shit, those are real. The next day, I could feel everything around me energetically. The plants around me, I could feel trees. I could feel the any kind of plants that were walking by or driving by. It's like I was connected to them. They were connected to me. We stopped after this retreat, Michelle and I stopped at Whole Foods on the way home. I could literally feel the energetic signature of every product on the shelf. And I could feel like this is compatible with my system. This is not. Since then, on 7 different occasions, whenever I've gone into deep meditation, or maybe I've done an MDMA journey or something along those lines, I'll have a red dot that appears on my head out of nowhere. And I literally have photographs of this. I was doing a Reiki session with someone a few months ago and got up off the table and I had a red dot right there over the third eye, which was, again, something I thought was bullshit. A few months ago, was in a place where I was really struggling and needed to get some work done, but I had had severe fatigue and just couldn't think straight. And so I literally just kind of kneeled down and prayed for help and support to give me the clarity I needed to get through this project that I was working on that day. And about 20 minutes later, had this just mental clarity and energy that I hadn't had in weeks. Sat down and I wrote for 3 or 4 hours straight, just went into flow, knocked it out. I was like, that was awesome. Went to the bathroom to brush my teeth, looked in the mirror, and I've got the red dot on my third eye again. I've had different experiences where things have moved in, a big part of this is that I got to a point about 2 years ago where I could feel entities or spirits around me physically. And I know that sounds absolutely nuts, but that was the case. And so whenever an energetic form like that would be in my vicinity, my heart would start to race. It's like a bubble of sound would come around my head, like silence. Everything would go silent. Sometimes this happened when we were in Egypt. This happened when we were in Sedona, Arizona. This happened when I was in the Paris airport. This has happened in local hotels. This has happened in our previous home. This has happened in this home. But whenever there is some kind of, again, spiritual entity or ghost in my vicinity, I would feel this just a wave of electricity move through my body. It's unlike anything I've ever felt before. I'd have my eyes closed at night in complete darkness, and all of a sudden I'd see a white orb go through my field of vision, even though my eyes are closed. Sometimes I get flashes of colored light, just again through closed eyes. And then I would feel the waves of electricity kind of move through me. And it got really rough for a while. at first I thought, am I going insane? But then Michelle had similar experiences as well. I've had experiences where things have physically moved in our hotel room. The doors would close on their own, or my phone would start playing music in the middle of the night out of nowhere. Different things like that are undeniable. And thankfully, I finally found someone about 6 months ago that could tell me why that was happening and help me fix it. And so this woman is extremely talented. She can actually see your auric fields. And she's like, yeah, your fields are basically gone. There is no energetic barrier between you and that side of life. And so you can feel them because, normally we have a 3, 4, 5 foot energetic barrier. That stuff can't get through. For me, I didn't. So they could just access me physically and I could feel that.
Can I ask you about that energetic barrier real quick? Is that the one that they talk about when there's coherence with HRV and stuff like that? I remember the HeartMath Institute has talked about this aura or this field where you can, like when people are around each other, there's coherence in the heartbeat or something like that. Is that what she's talking about?
That's part of it. That's definitely coherence. Is how coherent is your field? How stable is it? How strong is it? And, basically it's an auric field. So if, again, you ever see kind of the hippie, stuff, and I just laugh at myself now because I was the biggest skeptic of all of this. And now
I think about when we first met each other. When I think about when we first met each other and what has happened in order for you to be who you are now, either one of us, I could us talking about this in 2007 or 8, can't even. No.
Never. Not even 2 years ago, man. 3 years ago for me. But proof of God's sense of humor, where it's just like, hey, we're going to take the most skeptical person who doesn't think about this stuff at all, and we're just going to dunk them in the deep end. And so yes, so it's your auric field. Everybody has an energetic field. It's kind of like a torus ring that, I'm not an expert in this. I'm just kind of going through the deep end of it. But it's absolutely real. And so to get back to the bigger picture of this, from a spirituality perspective, once I started having these experiences and seeing the physical proof that I needed to see and feeling it in my own body over hundreds of times at this point over the last 2 years, I was like, oh, the spirit world is absolutely real. Ghosts are real. Entities are real. And if those are real, then that means our souls are real. And if our souls are real, that means God is real. That means angels are real and all of it's real. And that was the physical proof that my logical mind needed to be like, okay. And then I've spent the last 2 years going super deep down that rabbit hole. I've studied hundreds of hours of near-death experiences. I've started to literally map out just so that it can make sense to me, what this life is about, how the afterlife works, what God is about. Does Satan exist? Does heaven exist? Does hell exist? All of this stuff. And, it was brutally, brutally hard. It was just as hard as the mold, man, I can't tell you, to be in an environment when you're constantly accosted by these things, because they're around us all the time.
Well, you're completely, your entire paradigm for how you've lived your entire life has shifted, and you're reevaluating everything.
Everything. And it's not, and there's not a single part of it that has been easy or comfortable. Like, it's been torturous to the point where, there was a point 6 months ago where I was like, Michelle, I think if this continues, I'm either going to go insane because I can't get away from this, because we tried everything. We had shaman, work with me, and, and it doesn't matter where I went. I would still have these experiences. I was like, I think I'm going to have to move out into the woods and just try to isolate myself, because I don't know what else to do. Because then, that stuff would happen at night and the paranoia would come in, and it's like, you're sitting there, is something going to happen tonight? And it's the last thing that my nervous system needed. And so it was kind of getting rid of that place of peace that I desperately needed to fully heal. Right. So working with this woman, Laura, she could see what the issue was. And I've seen her every Monday now for 6 months, and it took about 2 or 3 months. But after that, she basically repaired the field, strengthened it, patched up any of the holes that were there, and all of it stopped. I stopped feeling it. My body stopped responding to it. I could still tell when there's something physically in my presence, but my body doesn't react to it, and it doesn't get through my field. So it doesn't bother me anymore. And so that's just been fascinating, but that was the catalyst that I needed to reawaken my spirituality and reopen my relationship with God in a very significant, real way.
So before we start talking more about that, like what was it that removed, or weakened like that field around you? Was it the psychedelics? Was it just how the mold and like how it affected like your central nervous system?
So I've talked to my doctor about this because my doctor, I've worked with many doctors, but one of them she went through her own toxic mold experience a decade ago that almost took her out. She's gone through her own spiritual awakening the last few years. And what she has told me is that when you go through a severe enough exposure of mold like I did, two things happen in her patients. They either die or they come back with some kind of spiritual gift. And the mold somehow changes something in the nervous system or in the brain that unlocks something or opens something up. And if you make it through that, she said, I can't tell you how many people who've gone through what you've gone through have had similar experiences and who now have the same type of sensitivities that I have. And she's one of them. With that being said, I can also run this back to my first and second 5-MeO DMT experiences, where that unlocked things to a different level. The first DMT experience was incredibly healing, and it unlocked, again, kind of that sensitivity to energy, but in a healthy way where I still had boundaries. The second experience was not a good experience, very traumatic, screaming in agony for 15 minutes, like what I would say going to hell, meaning when you go through DMT, you're dissolved out of your body and your ego and you go into spirit. And typically you connect with God in DMT. For my second session, I went in with quite a bit of fear and I didn't take enough of the medicine. And so I disassociated and lost my body, but I didn't go to connect with God. I got stuck in what I would call in between, which is what I would refer to as purgatory. So I'm no longer myself and I'm no longer connected with God or source. I'm literally stuck in the middle, which was like going to hell. It was unbelievably horrific. And I think that kind of shattered my field because it was so traumatic. And that's when a lot of these other experiences started to take place.
Well, it doesn't shock me. I've been not experiencing those kinds of things, but I've been listening to a really cool podcast for the past 2 years called Blurry Creatures, which is amazing. It's actually hosted by Aaron Rodgers' older brother and another guy. But then there's a guy who's done quite a bit of DMT. But this is just it's really touching on a bunch of things that I have begun to believe are true. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody hearing this is also going to resonate with it. And I'm sure there's going to be people who are skeptical. And, I even maintain a fair bit of skepticism. So, like, sometimes I'm hearing this, I'm like, okay, that's different than what I would have expected to be true. And even having had my own psychedelic experiences in the past, like, I don't regard them in the same way that you have. But there is something out there. And I think what's most fascinating is just at the beginning of this, you're talking about the spiritual element and how you became aware of it. And it's through what a lot of people are going to call drug experiences, right? That's what the lay term for what you're going through is. It's just that this guy's using drugs, but you're using drugs, quote unquote, and coming to a realization that, okay, there must be something more here. And that is leading me to conclude that there's good and there's evil. And what do I know about those two? Well, I know from my past, from growing up as a Christian, good is God, evil is Satan. So then you look at, and this is again tying into the food and the drugs, like the drug pharmaceutical industry. Oh, wow, like the evil forces in the world are using these things against the good things. So, okay, now this is coming full circle. So again, it's actually just reinforcing more and more of what I believe to be true about the times that we're in right now.
Yeah, 100%. And there are certainly good spirits, quote unquote, and bad negative spirits, quote unquote. And if you look at what's happening in the world today, there's a ton of evidence out there to point that the vast majority of people in power have dedicated their lives to worshiping a very dark side of this aspect, right, in exchange for power. And they're becoming more and more bold about demonstrating that and showing that off. And if you look at in the studies that I've done, Satan likes to pervert God's creation. And if man is one of God's greatest creations, Satan wants to pervert that in every way possible. And if we look at what's happening in the world, the human body is being perverted in every way possible. Obesity is now healthy, right? Where literally humans look like obese, fat, sick animals walking down a runway, and that's somehow celebrated. The perversion and the mutilation of genitalia, the perversion of the family and the male-female, polarity and dynamic, the poisoning of the food system, the poisoning of the water, the use of drugs to basically just dishonor the human body and spirit in every way possible. And so that's a part of this puzzle that I've now seen, and I think a lot more clarity than I would have previously in the past. And the experiences that I've had, I'll say that the spirit realm is much more vast and real than this realm. We just can't see it. At least the majority of us can't see it. Some people can. And so we don't think about it. It's like we're surrounded right now with Wi-Fi signals and cell phone signals that are going through our body at all the time, filled with information. We just can't perceive them. But some people, again, when they go through a certain experience and their nervous system gets turned up to, 11, all of a sudden they can perceive those frequencies now. Sometimes those frequencies are strong enough to manipulate the physical items and density in this world. That's when, doors start to close, or maybe I've had some instances in the past where I've had a hand at night literally grab my leg. I've seen things physically move from one place to the other, and that world is around us all the time, and it has an influence on us all the time. I can tell you also from previous experiences, now that I've had enough data points, that nightmares are 99.9% of the time caused by negative entities. You're in the presence of a negative entity or spirit if you're having nightmares. At least that's been my experience now. Anytime I've had nightmares, that energy has also been present. When that energy is not present, I've never had nightmares. And so, this stuff is around us all the time. It's usually feeding on our energy. It's trying to influence us. And I think it's a necessary part of life. I think those things serve a purpose. I think if evil and darkness wasn't here, then we'd basically be in heaven, and there's no opportunity to learn or grow, right? To learn and to grow is to be in the presence of difficulty, challenge, negativity, or things, the obstacles that you have to come over, temptations that you have to come over. And that's just a necessary part of this life. It's just very interesting that it's so subtle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just hit on a bunch of things that we've talked about here, about the perversion of the family, the perversion of the human body. And I mean, even when you were talking about the jab and what that was, it was an experimental gene manipulation vaccine, and people are now suffering the consequences of it. So
yeah, and you're getting genes if if the tests and data are accurate, you're getting genes that include, genes from snakes or reptile venom and just wicked, nasty stuff that has no business being in a human body, right?
Yeah, which is just the majority, I'd say the far majority of what's in our environment and our foods and everything else that we're dealing with. So it's just one thing's compounding the other. It seems like, again, like the vaccine just seemed to accelerate a lot of things that were already there.
I think the vaccines were obviously a massive act of evil, but it was also a necessary wake-up call to tell the average person or communicate to the average person, help them learn what boundaries are. I think modern society has forgotten what boundaries are. When it comes to just privacy or personal rights or personal space or property, what goes in your body, what doesn't. And we have forgotten how to hold boundaries against, people who are quote unquote in power or think that they're in power. And if that didn't wake everybody up, I don't know what will, right? If you're willing to give over the sovereignty and sanctity of your body to somebody in power so that they can inject something in you that you don't know what it is, holy smokes, man. Yeah, it's unfortunately a really, really hard lesson that a lot of people are learning, but I think it's going to be a huge wake-up call for society as a whole.
Yeah, I do too. And that's what kind of worries me about just the advent of AI and how things are going to be able to be manipulated on a scale that were not even fathomable a couple years ago. And we could definitely go on a rabbit trail here because I know that you have done extensive work with crypto and blockchain in the past, and I'd love to talk about it in the future. But that's probably going to take more than the time that we have left here. But it's worth putting a pin in that and just saying that if people haven't yet woken up to it, at least this podcast, other people can keep talking about it. And I do feel encouraged by the fact that this kind of a podcast 2.5 years ago would not have been able to stay up on YouTube for very long. And of course, it's going to get the Spotify blue thing about COVID vaccine, and whether or not it's misinformation is up to somebody who's listening to determine. But I, again, am happy that we can have a conversation. We can say the word vaccine, COVID-19, and not necessarily worry that we're going to get a strike or we're going to violate community guidelines and be put off of a channel just because we're talking about something. So in some aspects, I feel like we've made some progress.
Yeah, and as well, like, feel free to beep out those words, because it's really an interesting thing where we're tapping into the potential that those audiences bring to the table in the form of those platforms bring to the table in form of an audience, and they have their own ground rules. And I don't agree with those rules, but they are what they are. And so, I've had to, during COVID, my Instagram account got banned for like 9 months for talking about this stuff. And I was like, okay, I can either get removed and make zero impact on that platform, or I can, play by their rules and make an impact in any way that I can, bring people off of that platform into email, which is my platform, which I can then reignite that conversation again and have it. And so, it's the game we've got to play, unfortunately. So.
Well, I mean, the platforms that are out there enable us to get our message out. They have the ability to control the game, and how we can be heard. But it's interesting, man. It's like there's a lot of people that are starting to see the world very differently now. Like, there's been a couple other people that we've had on to the podcast and just in general just been talking to that that are similar to us. Been on the path, like been in the business world, been very, I would say, free thinkers, like but haven't been jarred hard enough. And all of them actually have gone through either something very, very personal, like they themselves or someone that's close to them has been going through an extremely tough journey. And now all of a sudden, like, they're looking around and going like, wow, like there's a lot of darkness happening right now. And like through that, they're finding their way back to God in a new way, and recognizing that there is like an actual battle that's taking place.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful silver lining to all of this, right? That's why I said, like, that as hard as all of this is, it is the necessary ingredient to be the catalyst to bring around all the goodness. You can't have one without the other, and so in some ways, it's like my mold experience. It really, really sucks, and it can be one of the best things in your life. So,
no, that's we're not gonna. I won't go all into what I experienced, but that's where I landed with it as well. Is that I'll end up living, barring some other, any other random thing that could happen in this world. But like, if I was to just continue on, like I'll live longer now because of it. Like, 'cause very similar to you, like I haven't had alcohol since August 2020. No, and I have a little bit of caffeine now through tea, but like, I was drinking 4 or 5 shots of espresso a day before, Adderall, Vyvanse, like I was, all of those things. And it's like, it's amazing. Like, it's funny. I think it was probably about a year. No, not a year ago. It was probably 4 or 5 months ago where like I was talking to my wife and I just looked, I was like, I feel like I am awake in a way that I haven't been since probably like my early 20s, maybe ever. Just like where like all of a sudden I feel like I've been given my life back and I can actually really see things again and like make decisions and recognize things that like I just wasn't. Like it was blocked for some reason.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. This was super fun.
Yeah, it was, man. I think there's probably other things that we could definitely dive into. and we'll have to do that at a later date. But yeah, no, it was thank you first just for being open and sharing the way that you shared with everybody, and sharing your story, especially something it's like just that personal, and like, I think something a lot of our listeners can learn from. I know I learned a lot from it today. And so, man, just thank you with your generosity of your time and your story, and just walking us through it.
You got it. You're welcome, brother. Appreciate you having me on and giving me a chance to share what I've gone through, and hopefully help others in the process. So appreciate it.
Right on, brother. You're welcome.